Welcome to Better Police Reports. I'm Jean Reynolds. Today's topic is writing the narrative. A narrative is another word for story, and a police narrative is the story of what happens during a call. So it could be an assault, it could be a domestic disturbance, it could be a break-in, it could be a traffic stop. Now, because we're exposed to stories all our lives, you'd think we'd have plenty of experience with telling stories, and it would be a simple matter to write a police narrative. But that isn't always true. Police narratives are different, and I think the best way to illustrate this is to tell you the story of a call and then change it into a police narrative so you can see how the process works. So the story I've picked out is about a fight in a bar. A woman named Mary goes to a bar some evening after work with a group of her friends. While she's there, another woman comes in, Barbara. Barbara and Mary are in love with the same guy, Joe. Barbara and Joe, in fact, were quite an item maybe a year ago, and then they broke up. Barbara blames Mary for stealing Joe away from her. Mary insists that she had nothing to do with the breakup. She didn't even know Joe at the time. Well, an argument begins, it gets more and more heated, and finally there's a physical fight. The bartender and another customer separate the two women and call the police. So you, the officer, arrive. Probably the first thing you do is to check the women to see if they need medical help. They have some bruises and scratches, but they decline to get any medical treatment. You separate them, you look around the bar, maybe you're looking for broken glassware, other signs of the fight. You ask if there's a surveillance video. You get a story from various people. The bartender, who is the one who called the police. You might talk to the customer who helped break up the fight. And of course you get statements from Mary and Barbara. You finally decide that Barbara was the aggressor. She was the one who first slapped Mary. And so you arrest Barbara and you transport her to jail. When it's all over, you sit down to write your report. Very likely you write your report on a laptop, and it would have a box labeled narrative. Now, I have a question for you. Where did the story begin? I began the story when Mary and her friends decided to go for a drink after work. Would you say that that was absolutely the beginning of the story? Well, you probably wouldn't. There are a lot of possible starting points. You could say the story began with the argument. You could say the story began when Barbara walked in. Or you could even say the story began when Barbara and Joe broke up. If you were writing a story for a novel or a movie or a TV show, there are all kinds of ways you could tell it. Now, this is where a police narrative is different. A police narrative usually begins when the officer arrives on the scene. Now, think about this for a moment. You're the officer, you walk in there. It's over. So you sort of are going to have to tell the story backwards. It would be kind of as if you said to a little girl, I'm going to tell you the story of Cinderella. And the first thing you said was, the prince and Cinderella got married and moved into his castle and lived happily ever after. The little girl would say, wait a minute, where's the rest of the story? So that's kind of the situation that you're in as a police officer. So that's the first challenge. Starting your story, as you should, with your arrival at the bar. Now there's a second challenge. I've given you a lot of facts about this story. Here's one of them. Mary and Barbara are in love with the same guy, Joe. Now, how would you write that in your report? Can you see that there's a problem? You weren't there. You never met these two women until you were called to the bar to deal with the fight. If you say Mary and Joe are in love with the same guy, you're going to sound a little bit ridiculous. It's almost like you think you got into a time machine and you actually saw the story unfold, and of course you didn't. I see this kind of thing in police reports all the time, and it's a mistake. Often happens with traffic stops and accidents. An officer will write something like, Bob Wilson was texting and didn't see the stop sign. He kept going into the intersection where he collided. Wait a minute, you weren't there. So another problem that you have in a police report is you always have to say how you know what you know. That way your report is more likely to stand up in court if there's a hearing down the road. So how do you handle these challenges? Remember, there are two of them. One, you're starting the story late after you arrived. Second, you're having to explain how you know just about every fact in your report. Well, the answer is don't try to write a novel, a short story, a TV script. What you're going to do is break your report into sections with a section for each person, beginning with yourself, the officer. You come first. Now, this isn't the way you would tell a bedtime story to a child, but this works beautifully for a police report. So your first paragraph, you explain why you were there, you were dispatched, what you saw and what you did when you arrived. Remember, you checked the women to see if they needed medical attention, and you asked some questions. Now you go to each relevant person and write that person's statement. And as you're going, there might be some repetition because each person will probably tell you a few of the same things. You're probably going to hear Joe's name again and again, for example. You're also going to hear some contradictions. Barbara's going to tell you that Mary started the fight. Mary's going to tell you that Barbara started the fight. So as you go, though, and interview each person and maybe include the surveillance video, if there is one, you can establish that you know for sure that Barbara was the aggressor. So again, you start with yourself, a paragraph for you, a paragraph for the bartender, a paragraph for Mary, a paragraph for Barbara, a paragraph for the other customer if you decide to interview someone else, a paragraph for the surveillance video, and so on. It's not the way you tell a conventional story, but it works beautifully in a police report. Now, there's one more thing I have to caution you about. The last part of a report is where you tie up all the loose ends. So you would arrest Barbara, you would read Barbara her rights from your Miranda card, you would transport her to jail. What often happens here is that officers forget to say who did what. And so we read something like, Barbara was read her rights. Barbara was arrested. Barbara was transported to jail. Well, if something goes wrong, or if there are questions later on, it's going to be very embarrassing if you didn't say who did these things. What if, for example, what if Barbara gets injured during the ride? You think they're going to want to know who was behind the steering wheel, right? So you need to start every sentence with who did what, and that way you will have a thorough report. You can see some complete reports properly organized at my website, www.yourpoliceright.com. My book, Criminal Justice Report Writing, has a whole chapter on how to organize a report. And again, there are sample reports that you can read and study and you can use as models. There are also exercises you can do, and there's an answer key in the back so you can check your understanding. The book is inexpensive. It's available in paperback and ebook editions, and you can see a free preview at www.amazon.com. And that's it for today. Thanks for watching.